When the world's greatest detective faces a psychopathic god with daddy issues, when human ingenuity meets manufactured perfection, one's just a man in a cape, the other can level cities with his eyes. But sometimes being just human is exactly what you need to take down a false god. Why Batman actually has a shot. Let's get one thing straight right off the bat. In a straight-up brawl, Batman gets turned into bat paste faster than you can say Martha. Homelander's got laser vision that can slice through buildings, super strength that makes Superman look like he needs to hit the gym, and an ego so fragile that any perceived slight sends him into dark mode. So how the hell does a dude in a fancy costume with trust fund gadgets take down America's golden boy psychopath? The answer lies in what makes Batman truly dangerous. He's not just some rich guy with toys. He's a master strategist who's spent his entire adult life figuring out how to beat opponents who are way stronger than him. Every single member of the Justice League has a Batman contingency plan. And that's not because Bruce Wayne is paranoid. Okay, he's totally paranoid. It's because he understands that raw power without strategy is just expensive property damage. Homelander represents everything Batman despises. A false hero who uses fear and intimidation to maintain power. Someone who's never had to earn respect through actual heroism. More importantly, Homelander's never faced an opponent who's studied him, learned his patterns, and prepared specifically to exploit his weaknesses. That's Batman's specialty, and it's about to become Homelander's worst nightmare. Phase 1. Intelligence gathering and psychological profiling. Before Batman even considers going toe-to-toe with Homelander, he'd spend months, maybe years, studying every aspect of Vought's golden boy. Bruce Wayne has resources that most governments would envy, and he'd use every single one of them to build a comprehensive psychological and tactical profile. The beauty of Homelander is that he's incredibly predictable. Once you understand his core psychology, he's essentially a narcissistic child with godlike powers. His need for adoration, his explosive reactions to criticism, his inability to handle genuine challenges to his authority, these aren't just personality quirks. They're exploitable weaknesses that a tactical genius like Batman would absolutely weaponize. Batman would infiltrate Vought Corporation, probably using one of his many fake identities, to get close to the organization. Maybe Bruce Wayne makes a business investment in Vought, giving him legitimate access to their facilities and personnel. Within weeks, he'd have detailed files on every aspect of Homelander's behavior patterns, power limitations, and psychological triggers. Here's where it gets really interesting. Batman's investigative skills would uncover things about Homelander that even Vought doesn't fully understand. The childhood trauma from the lab experiments, the specific nature of his powers, the way his abilities interact with different materials and energy frequencies. Knowledge is power, and Batman would gather enough knowledge to level the playing field significantly. Exploiting the psychological warfare angle. This is where Batman's biggest advantage comes into play. Homelander's used to fear and worship. People either cower before him or fawn over him, but nobody challenges him intellectually or psychologically. Batman's whole thing is getting inside his opponents' heads and making them beat themselves. Imagine the psychological impact of someone who genuinely doesn't fear Homelander showing up and treating him like just another criminal. Not with worship, not with terror, just with cold, analytical disdain. Batman's dealt with gods, aliens, and cosmic entities. To him, Homelander would just be another unstable meta-human who needs to be stopped. The key would be undermining Homelander's self-image systematically. Every interaction would be designed to chip away at that narcissistic facade. Batman wouldn't try to intimidate through physical presence. Instead, he'd use information warfare, revealing uncomfortable truths about Homelander's past, exposing the artificial nature of his heroic image, demonstrating that his perfection is really just sophisticated corporate marketing. Batman's probably the only person in either universe who could look Homelander in the eye and say, "You're not a god, you're not a hero, you're just a lab experiment with anger management issues," and mean it completely. That kind of psychological assault would be devastating to someone whose entire identity is built on being superior to everyone else. Technological solutions when gadgets meet gamma radiation. Here's where Batman's prep time becomes absolutely crucial. He's faced power levels similar to Homelander's before: Superman, Doomsday, Darkseid. And he's developed technology specifically designed to handle opponents who are physically superior. Batman would definitely develop some kind of energy absorption or redirection system for dealing with the laser vision. We've seen him create tech that can handle similar energy-based attacks, and Homelander's heat vision, while powerful, follows predictable physics patterns that can be countered with the right materials and energy fields. The flight advantage is trickier, but Batman's dealt with aerial opponents before. Advanced tracking systems, predictive algorithms that can anticipate flight patterns, and area denial weapons that force opponents into specific zones where ground-based countermeasures are more effective. Plus, Batman's own aerial capabilities through the Batwing and various gliding technologies give him more mobility options than most opponents expect. But here's the really clever part. Batman wouldn't try to build technology that directly overpowers Homelander. Instead, he'd focus on tech that exploits specific vulnerabilities or creates tactical situations where Homelander's advantages become liabilities. Environmental manipulation, sensory disruption, anything that forces the fight to happen on Batman's terms rather than Homelander's. The Compound V connection. Biological warfare. This is where Batman's scientific knowledge becomes a game changer. Homelander's powers come from Compound V, which means they have a chemical basis that can potentially be disrupted or countered. Batman's not just a detective and tactician, he's also a world-class scientist who's developed antidotes and countermeasures for various meta-human abilities. Given enough time and resources, which Batman definitely has, he could potentially develop a compound that interferes with Compound V's effects. Not necessarily something that completely removes Homelander's powers, but maybe something that destabilizes them, reduces their effectiveness, or creates unpredictable side effects that level the playing field. The beauty of this approach is that Homelander has probably never considered that his powers could be chemically compromised. He's so used to being invulnerable that the idea of biological warfare specifically targeting his abilities would be completely outside his experience. That element of surprise could be crucial in the opening moments of any confrontation. Batman might also discover other biological vulnerabilities, specific frequencies that disrupt Compound V, materials that interfere with his cellular structure, or environmental conditions that reduce his effectiveness. Remember, Homelander is still fundamentally human, albeit heavily modified, which means he still has biological systems that can potentially be disrupted. Environmental manipulation. Controlling the battlefield. One thing Batman excels at is choosing when and where fights happen. He wouldn't face Homelander in an open area where flight and ranged attacks provide maximum advantage. Instead, he'd engineer situations where the environment itself becomes a weapon and limits Homelander's tactical options. Underground locations where flying is restricted, areas with complex layouts that favor stealth and tactical positioning over raw power, environments with materials or energy sources that interfere with Homelander's abilities. Batman's got more secret bases and backup facilities than most countries have military installations. The psychological aspect of environmental control is huge too. Fighting in Batman's territory with his rules, using his preparations, that immediately puts Homelander on the defensive psychologically. He's used to being the one who dictates terms, who has all the advantages. Being forced to adapt to someone else's game plan would be deeply uncomfortable for someone with his control issues. Batman might even use symbolic locations, places that have meaning to Homelander's psychological development or trauma. Fighting in a recreation of the Vought labs where he was raised, or in environments that trigger specific psychological responses. Every aspect of the confrontation would be designed to destabilize Homelander mentally while providing tactical advantages for Batman. The team-up factor. When prep time meets allies. Here's where Batman's greatest strength really shines. He doesn't work alone when the stakes are high. While he might do the initial intelligence gathering and planning solo, when it comes time for the actual confrontation, he'd have backup plans involving allies who can contribute specific capabilities. Superman would be the obvious choice if this were a crossover scenario. But even within Batman's usual circle, there are options. Nightwing for additional tactical support, Oracle for real-time information warfare, Tim Drake for technical assistance. Batman's network of allies gives him force multiplication that Homelander simply doesn't have. The key would be using allies strategically rather than just throwing more bodies at the problem. Each team member would have specific roles designed to exploit particular aspects of Homelander's psychology or abilities. Coordinated attacks that force him to split his attention, backup systems that activate if primary plans fail, escape routes, and contingencies for every possible scenario. Homelander's used to being the apex predator, but he's never faced a coordinated team effort designed specifically to counter his abilities in psychology. The complexity and unpredictability of multiple opponents working in perfect coordination would be completely outside his experience. Timing and patience, the long game. Batman's biggest advantage might actually be his willingness to play the long game. Homelander wants immediate gratification, instant dominance, quick resolution to any challenge. He's impatient, especially when his authority is questioned or his image is threatened. Batman, on the other hand, is perfectly willing to spend years setting up the perfect trap. The ideal scenario would involve Batman systematically dismantling Homelander's support structure over time, exposing Vaught's corruption, revealing the truth about Compound 5, turning public opinion against their Golden Boy hero. By the time they actually fight, Homelander would be psychologically isolated and emotionally destabilized. This approach also gives Batman maximum prep time to develop countermeasures, study Homelander's patterns, and prepare contingencies for various scenarios. Every month of preparation makes the eventual confrontation more likely to succeed, while Homelander's psychological state becomes increasingly unstable as his carefully constructed world falls apart. The moral dimension: true hero versus false god. Here's something that can't be overlooked. Batman represents genuine heroism earned through sacrifice and dedication, while Homelander is artificial heroism created through corporate marketing. That fundamental difference would be apparent to anyone watching their confrontation, and public perception matters to Homelander's psychology. Batman's reputation is built on actually saving people, stopping real threats, and making personal sacrifices for the greater good. Homelander's reputation is manufactured by PR teams and maintained through fear and intimidation. In any public confrontation, those different foundations would become obvious, and that revelation would be devastating to Homelander's self-image. The moral high ground also gives Batman tactical advantages. He can rely on civilian cooperation, law enforcement support, where not corrupted by Vought, and assistance from other genuine heroes. Homelander's support is largely artificial and would evaporate quickly if his true nature became widely known. Technology meets psychology, the ultimate trap. Batman's winning strategy would probably involve combining technological solutions with psychological warfare in ways that exploit Homelander's specific weaknesses. Maybe holographic projections that force him to confront his childhood trauma, while automated systems deploy countermeasures for his powers. Environmental controls that recreate the laboratory conditions of his upbringing, while chemical agents interfere with his Compound 5 enhancement. The goal wouldn't necessarily be to overpower Homelander directly, but to create conditions where his own psychological instability becomes his greatest enemy. Force him into increasingly erratic behavior, make him lose control, turn his rage against himself rather than others. Batman's dealt with plenty of unstable opponents who were physically superior. The key is always making them defeat themselves. The verdict: preparation beats power. Could Batman defeat Homelander? Absolutely, but not through direct confrontation. It would require months or years of preparation, careful psychological manipulation, technological innovation, and strategic thinking that exploits every aspect of Homelander's artificial nature. The key insight is that Homelander has never faced someone who combined Batman's level of preparation with complete psychological immunity to intimidation. He's used to fear working as his primary weapon, but Batman's faced actual gods and cosmic entities. Some lab-grown psychopath with daddy issues wouldn't even register on his fear scale. Batman's victory wouldn't come from matching Homelander's power level, but from understanding that sometimes the most dangerous opponents are the ones who've never learned to handle genuine adversity. When manufactured perfection meets earned excellence, when artificial power meets disciplined intelligence, the outcome is more predictable than you might think. In the end, Batman doesn't need to be stronger than Homelander, he just needs to be smarter, more prepared, and more willing to do whatever it takes to protect innocent people. And when it comes to those qualities, the Dark Knight's track record speaks for itself.